Going on, everyone? John Matrix here. So we got another Warhammer 40k reaction video for you. This is one that was requested by one of my YouTube members. We're gonna get into some Adeptus Mechanicus. It looks like we're getting into the Schism of Mars, the Warhammer 40k lore by the Scholar's Lore. We are currently doing this reaction live, so if you want to, you can go down below and you can click the join button, see if any of those YouTube membership tiers would have any kind of interest with you. So if you want to join in on any of the post discussions or pre-discussions that we have for some of these live reactions, you can feel free to do that. As always, there will be a link down below in the info section to this original video and to the Scholar's Lore's channel. Down in the description, so if you want to check out his channel and any of the content he's made, or if you want to check out the original video here with my, without my reactions or commentary, feel free to click down below and do so. But for now, we're just going to go ahead and get on into this video. So boom, volume's good, this is up, let's do it.
Within our glorious Imperium, there exists an organization which holds an unmatched level of autonomy over its worlds.
Right, that is one of the things that's like the super unique thing about the Adeptus Mechanicus, is that they're like the one, I don't know if organization is the right term. I guess faction would probably be the right, use of the word, but they're like the one faction that is kind of immune, I guess you could say, from imperial law. They're allowed to have their own kind of beliefs. They don't necessarily like worship the emperor as the god emperor. They worship the omnissiah, who I guess they kind of believe is what the emperor is, this all-knowing great machine spirit god. But they kind of like are able to work kind of autonomously from a lot of the imperial rules and laws, mainly I think because in the early days of the Imperium, the emperor really needed the Mechanicus to build their weapons and armor and ships and everything for the Great Crusade. So they kind of made, I think he kind of made a deal. I was like, all right, if you do this for me, well, I'll give you guys a little bit more leeway. I believe that's the case. So I assume we're going to find out a little bit more here in the video, but let's go.
And yet is so intertwined with the dealings of autonomy over its worlds, and yet is so intertwined with the dealings of terror, that neither the Imperium nor this group could likely survive without...
These dudes look like the Sentinels from the Matrix. Little squid sentinels or whatever that would hunt down stuff. So I don't know. It's reminding me of that. Anyway.
That neither the Imperium nor this group could likely survive without one another. The institution which I'm referring to is, of course, the Adeptus Mechanicus. These are the mysterious and somewhat abstruse adherents to the cult Mechanicus, who worship the holy trinity of the machine god, the omnissiah, and the motive force. Residing upon their independently governed forge worlds, the Mechanicus tech priests exist as something of a vassal state, in that while they may dictate the laws and policies of their own territory, they still must contribute their production output based on the desires of the High Lords of Terror.
So I'm curious, and maybe he'll talk about this in the video here. I know they're like, Mars is like the primary forge world, I believe. That is like the forge world of the Imperium. So I wonder, like, does the Imperium themselves, when they're going out and they're conquering new worlds, do they find a world and they're just like, hey, we think this would be a good forge world for you, and hand it over to the Mechanicus? Or do the Mechanicus, are they like, hey man, we want to set up a forge world in this sector, can you hook a brother up, kind of a situation, and they put in the request to do that? Or do the Mechanicus have like their own exploratory forces that finds forge worlds, or worlds they would deem to be good as forge worlds in certain sectors to set up? Because I would think there would want to be some kind of strategic coordination between them and the Imperium on different areas of the galaxy to want to set up forge worlds so that they could resupply and re-equip and have like forward operating areas to repair ships and all that kind of stuff. So I'm curious if in this video he's going to get into that and how that works.
Their production output based on the desires of the High Lords of Terra. While this agreement has been incredibly fruitful and beneficial to both parties, the Martians were not always so amenable to this accord. Today we are to explore the schism of Mars, which occurred during the darkest hours of the Horus Heresy, and which ultimately led to the Red Planet falling under the insidious sway of chaotic worshippers.
Interesting. I knew that they had kind of their own civil war at one point in time, like you said, called the Schism. I've only like really just heard about it as that term, the Schism, but I didn't know it was something where the chaos was involved. I thought it was more of like an ideological difference and how they wanted to do things with the Imperium, but maybe that's part of what they're talking about with chaos. With chaos influence.
Red Planet falling under the insidious sway of chaotic worshippers. Firstly, we will learn of the agreements between Terra and Mars, which had caused the first sparks of rebellion to occur, before moving on to the treacherous actions of Horus, who was instrumental in bringing about the downfall of our ancient ally. In the ancient days of our history, long before the time of Space Marines, Primarchs, or even the Emperor himself, mankind had begun to realize its own destiny within the stars by colonizing and conquering thousands of worlds across the vast expanse of space. Alien races were subjugated. Psychers first emerged within the flames of war, and most importantly, mankind made some of its most significant and terrible discoveries. This was the dark age of technology, and it was during this period that mankind reached its true apex as a galactic civilization. Lasting from the 18th to the 23rd millennium, our ancestors wrangled control of the tumultuous warp simply for space travel. We created true, abominable intelligences who were given mighty frames of metal before being sent out into the stars to act as our armies. The scientific discoveries made during this time were so advanced that even in the 41st millennium, the most learned of tech priests and scholars are still dumbfounded by any of the forbidden data scraps which can be recovered.
I still find that whole idea fascinating, that even in, you know, the far reaches of the future, there's kind of been like an apocalypse that happens to humans, and then there's a regression, and now it's kind of a rediscovering again of technologies and whatnot that humans once had, and the fact that humans at one point were one of, if not like the highest technological, you know, advanced species in the universe at one point in time, to the point where orcs and Eldar, you know, didn't even want to fight them, and they had, you know, peace treaties and whatnot. I still find that like super fascinating. And then the idea of the Imperium now going out and trying to hunt down STCs and learning how to use them, and the fact that some STCs, like I don't remember what video it was, but there was some kind of video about a story of an Adeptus Mechanicus ship that might be a living STC, and that at one point in time when it was in danger, like kind of came alive and destroyed an Eldar ship by like creating a black hole or something like that. So like the idea of these AIs kind of hiding themselves because they're afraid of potentially being destroyed, maybe if they're discovered, because of humanity's regression, you know, and not wanting to trust AI because of the AI uprising that happened at one point in time, which potentially could have been because of chaos corruption. I don't know. I just find that whole like storyline fascinating and would love to learn more about it at some point in time. I don't know if any more of that's been elaborated on in the 40k universe, or if they just kind of left it as like you learn bits and pieces here and there, and the rest of it, they, you know, purposely is meant to be kind of more of a mystery. But I always find that stuff fascinating. But anyway,
by any of the forbidden data scraps which can be recovered. Both Holy Terror and the newly terraformed planet of Mars had coexisted during this period as stellar empires, which held a sense of neutrality towards one another, and yet were generally cooperative towards furthering the betterment of humanity. The two consisted of vastly different societies, cultures, and ways of life, and yet, in this golden age of discovery and growth, the twin worlds threw in their arms together, all to ensure that mankind could conquer the very stars. This was not just a period of rapid technological growth, as humanity had also seized dominion over tens of thousands of worlds across all of space, forming the foundations of the first human galactic empire. Unfortunately, however, the unparalleled growth and expansion of our nascent species led to a most cataclysmic period of our history, known as the Age of Strife. This era was heralded by a series of tremendous warp storms, which isolated the worlds of man from one another and led to the first mass incursions of demons within our territories. Furthermore, mankind was forced to defend itself from the mass rebellions of its own AI forces. Known during this time as the Men of Iron, the AI
Men of Iron,
had
that's what it
become
was, not
utterly
Metal Men.
embedded within all aspects of human society. And so, when this revolt eventually came, it was horrifically devastating to our bewildered ancestors. Oceans were sucked up from orbit, entire worlds were scoured by nanomachines, and even the stars themselves were snuffed out of existence by the most arcane of tools which the Men of Iron had seized control of. Yet despite this period of terror and anguish, mankind preserved itself against the dark. The abominable intelligences were expunged from existence, and yet it seemed that any hope of mankind, standing as a galactic empire, had been brought to ruin. Every human colony had been separated from one another, with most falling to the ways of barbarism, and some even being conquered by the ravenous alien species who lurked within the deepest stars of our galaxy. This period of darkness lasted until the onset of the 30th millennium, and it is here that our story may begin. Despite being forced to endure 7 millennia of hardship and strife, mankind is nothing if not resilient, and as such, many of the former colonies and planets of man had reformed their societies and reconstructed themselves into independent and sovereign worlds. Principally amongst these surviving planets would be our venerable homeworld of Terra and the red planet of Mars.
If I remember correctly, I think Mars actually during that time period didn't have a lot of strife. If I remember correctly, I think Mars actually kind of made it out of that time period relatively okay compared to most other worlds, including Terra. Unless I'm mistaken, I could be misremembering.
World of Terra and the red planet of Mars. Upon the fertile and lush grasslands, the highly advanced world of Mars had not been safe from the calamitous time of strife. Hundreds of rival factions had risen and fallen. Civil wars had swept the world, and many an ancient structure had been brought to ruin by the sheer levels of devastation brought about by brotherly conflict.
This might have been what I was thinking about earlier when I was saying about like ideological or whatever and not influenced by chaos as much. I might have been thinking about this time period and them just having a lot of different civil wars going on before the actual cult of the Mechanicus came to be. Yeah, that might have been what I was thinking of.
Sheer levels of devastation brought about by brotherly conflict. Some of the archaic and Kabbalistic weapons brought to bear were so destructive that they burnt away the atmosphere which had been so tenderly and carefully formed by their ancestors. This, once again, allowed the harsh and intense radiation of the sun to burn away the surface of Mars, reducing its landscape back into naught but an acrid and carmine desert.
Damn, so at one point they terraformed Mars and made it more of an Earth-like planet with oceans and, you know, greenery, trees, etc. And then the Civil War destroyed the atmosphere and then made it back into the red planet that it pretty much is now in our present time. That's pretty rough. Pretty rough.
To naught but an acrid and carmine desert. After centuries of death and war, it seemed that one faction had at last claimed the red crown of Mars, and this would be the cult Mechanicus. The ancient priests espoused the teachings of the machine god, in that all of technology was an extension of the divine, and that in order to best serve their technocratic god, that they must further the development and discovery of greater mechanical wonders. As this new faith took hold, Mars was reshaped into a planet-spanning factory. Every aspect of their society became dedicated towards the production of technological artifacts.
The first Forge world.
The hive cities being integrated within the arcane manufactorums of the world. Their society was headed by a figure known as the Fabricator General, who at the time had quickly organized the Red Planet into becoming rather self-sufficient after the long millennia of horrors before him. In addition to rebuilding this world, their leader also began the process of sending out new exploratory fleets into the cosmos, in the hopes that they could reconnect some of the scattered worlds of humanity and potentially discover some of the bygone technologies from their golden age.
Didn't they kind of avoid Terra at that time? Like looking at Terra and seeing like how it had regressed back into basically like a desert wasteland planet, and humanity was pretty barbaric, whatever, you know, you get what I'm saying. And so like they kind of felt like there wasn't really anything to salvage there until the Emperor came along and united them and then went to Mars. I believe that's the case, but maybe I'm incorrect and misremembering.
Discover some of the bygone technologies from their golden age. The first planet they dispatched a fleet to, however, was not for exploration. It was for war. The techno-barbarians of Terra still possessed a great bounty of the forbidden weapons and artifacts from the dark age of technology.
Guess I was
the
there.
Fabricator General could not rest whilst these savages still clung onto tools which they cared not to understand. As such, the two planets entered into a protracted period of conflict, with immense raids and invasions sporadically plunging both the societies of Terra and of Mars into devastation.
Clearly I was mistaken. Clearly I was wrong, as he's already corrected me.
Long gone were the days of cooperation between the parents of humanity. However, all this changed with the onset of the 30th millennium. It was during the climactic days of the Age of Strife when the Emperor of Man first presented himself to the techno-barbarian tribes. He had emerged seemingly from nowhere, only to rapidly conquer and unify the various warring groups into a cohesive planet-spanning force, once again cementing holy terror as a unified and singular entity. His aspirations were simple. He had a plan to continue this conquest out through the stars, all to reunite humanity once again under a combined banner so that his species could live peacefully and prosper for all of time. With this goal in mind, he had orchestrated the formation of a newly armed force which would have the strength to propel humanity out across the galaxy, and these were the first of his Space Marines. Despite the size of his army, reclaiming the Milky Way was a prodigious task, and it was one which he knew could not be accomplished without a significant injection of technocratic machinery to bolster it with, and so he turned his gaze to Mars. Knowing of the arcane tools held in their arsenal and of the importance behind securing an unbreakable alliance between the two worlds, he omitted the option of conquest and chose instead to seek a more amicable and peaceful integration of their society. In the waning days of the 30th millennium, he landed upon the peak of Olympus Mons as something of a shining star to all of the Red Planet. This location was indeed a ploy by the Emperor, as when the first tech priests were dispatched to learn of his arrival, they quickly fell to their knees in reverence of this figure, who they could only assume to be the Omnissiah
The
himself.
Omnissiah.
I should quickly note that within the cult of Mars, they worship a holy trinity, consisting of the machine god, the Omnissiah, and the motive force.
So I wonder, I thought the machine god and the Omnissiah were the same thing, just different like ways of talking about it. And I don't know what was this last one?
Mars, they worship a holy trinity, consisting of the machine god, the Omnissiah, and the motive force.
Yeah, I don't think I've heard of the motive force before, but I thought the machine god and the Omnissiah were essentially the same being, and they would just use different terminologies. So I didn't know that they had kind of like this holy trinity of things that they worshipped. Interesting. So I assume, I mean, obviously they believe the Emperor is the Omnissiah, and I assume that the machine god are essentially STC AIs that they just don't know are necessarily AIs. I could be mistaken or just don't know. And I don't know what this third thing is. So hopefully we'll talk about that a little bit more, but that's kind of interesting to me.
Consisting of the machine god, the Omnissiah, and the motive force.
The motive force.
Whilst the machine god may represent the omniscient, all-encompassing power of divinity found throughout the technological artifacts of the galaxy, the Omnissiah can be seen as the physical avatar of their god. It was prophesied that the machine god ordained for an avatar to present himself to the Martians, as he would better enable them to scour the known universe for new discoveries of technocratic treasures. The Emperor likely predicted that he would have been attributed as the Omnissiah, and so his landing on the greatest of mountains, which held the home of the Fabricator General, only solidified this view in the eyes of the Martians.
Emperor ain't dumb.
The two leaders quickly met to discuss the terms of alliance, which would benefit all of humanity henceforth. The Emperor posed that he would require Mars and the forge worlds of the galaxy to commit their production output to his forces, and that they would support him in conquering the previous vestiges of humanity. Furthermore, he also forbade the use of several archaic technologies, most notably the use of true, sentient AI. This was softened by the promise that the Martians could hold complete authority over their own worlds, dictating them in any way which they desired, so long as they remained loyal to the overall direction of the Imperium.
I wonder why that is that he wanted to, like, I mean, obviously there was an AI uprising, so there is obvious, you know, that side of it. But I wonder if it was because of the basis of human AI technology is susceptible to some kind of corruption or something, because I believe like the Eldari have AI, and I believe the Necrons have AI, and they haven't had those kind of issues. Maybe I'm incorrect, but I believe that is the case, you know. So I don't know if it's just human technology is susceptible to corruption, or if it was just a situation where obviously he was trying to avoid another AI uprising situation that could have been even worse than it was last time. But I find that interesting that that was one of the main things was, you know, no AI. And obviously that would kind of, like, you know, I feel like that would go against what they would want, you know, the Mechanicus would want. But anyway.
In addition, the tech priests would be permitted to continue in their worship of the machine god, and their theological beliefs would not be infringed upon by any imperial organizations going forward. After some discourse, the two parties agreed, And the new Treaty of Mars was signed within the cavernous underbelly of Olympus Mons. The Martians took upon the new name as the Adeptus Mechanicus, and the two worlds became forever tied to this mutually beneficial pact. It is said that signing this treaty was the reason behind the Emperor replacing the Raptor Imperialis with the symbol of the Aquila, with each of the two heads representing the worlds of Terra and of Mars.
Interesting.
For many of the tech priests, they were elated at the terms of this accord.
I don't know why, but if anyone has played, what is it, Warframe? This looks like, I think her name's Lotus, the narrator woman that talks to you a lot and gives you the various missions. Which reminds me of her for some reason. Probably just the facial thing, like the way her face is covered is very similar. Anyway.
They could continue in their reverence of all things mechanical. They could hold autonomy over their worlds. And they had even been graced with the presence of the Omnissiah himself.
So it's interesting that they were also given autonomy over their own worlds. So any worlds they conquered would be considered their own and be governed by them and not governed by the Imperium. So I would guess that would probably answer my question, and that they would have their own exploratory forces that go out and claim worlds of their own to do with as they please. Although I would assume there probably is some coordination between them for strategic purposes, for resupply and, rearming and ship repair, etc.
And they had even been graced with the presence of the Omnissiah himself. Nevertheless, there were some who were uneasy at the new agreement, and it was from these corrupted few that led Mars to its downfall. Not all accepted the Emperor as the Omnissiah, even though he descended as a golden angel.
Bro, that looks terrible. Like having your mouth forced open with all those tubes going in. Like, is that really necessary? Couldn't you find other ways of getting the tubing into your face without having to deal with that? You know what I mean? I don't know. Anyway.
As the Omnissiah, even though he descended as a golden angel, clad in the finest of armors and speaking nothing but honeyed words, the Martians retained some level of suspicion regarding his motives. Many believed that he was indeed holding up a facetious visage of their god, and that he was willingly exploiting their faith in order to formulate an accord which would solely benefit himself. The sect who opposed him considered the idea of giving up their independence to be simply intolerable, especially since the Martians had long held some degree of military superiority over the stunted techno-barbarian tribes. Looking at their once proud world as now being reduced to nothing but a tethered and shackled vassal was utterly shameful and enraging to the tech priests, some of whom felt that their entire history would be wiped clean in favor of a pro-Terran tale.
It is kind of an interesting thought of who do you think would win had another war if they hadn't been able to come to an accord and Earth and Mars went to a war at that time period where the Emperor just got done reunifying Terra. Who would have won? Because I don't, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't necessarily think he had started the Primarchs, developing them yet. And I don't think he'd created the Astartes yet. I still think he has a Thunder Legion at that time. I don't think he'd gotten rid of them yet. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he did start all those things and that's already happened and the Astartes were already a thing before they signed that treaty. But it would be interesting. It'd be interesting to see what that would come down to. And I mean, obviously the Emperor's, as powerful as a psyker he is, it would be pretty hard for them to do anything against him, really. And I feel like maybe it would be a situation where once he had displayed enough power, then he might be able to get them to fall in line, kind of a situation. But at what cost, I think that's probably essentially why he didn't try to just conquer them to begin with, is because it would cost them too much at the time as far as men and forces. But anyway, just more speculation.
Would be wiped clean in favor of a pro-Terran tale. Furthermore, their religion was always founded upon one ideal above all others, and that was that in order to best worship their deity, that they must discover new and more advanced technologies as they were a direct gift bequeathed upon humanity.
Right. And so cutting themselves off from AI that could potentially, you know, learn about other newer technologies and discover and create newer technologies, that would be kind of against that whole principle, right? You know, so.
As such, the idea that they must halt in their research and utilization of artificial intelligences was tantamount to sacrilege, and yet they were forced to comply by the decree of the Pact of Mars. Amongst those who were weary of the Emperor's true intentions was a magos known as Kelber Hal. He had been present at the signing of the fabled treaty, and to him he felt that the declaration was simply a way of avoiding what would have otherwise been an inevitable war.
It's true.
As he heard the Emperor speak, he saw past his shining appearance and only recognized him as a warlord who would simply take control of Mars by force if they did not comply with his insulting treaty.
Which is probably what happened.
Despite his strong reservations, he was forced to bitterly watch as his world was signed away, but his trepidations did not end here. Over the next 2 centuries, much changed across the landscape of Mars. The great shipyards of the Iron Ring were abuzz, constantly churning out new barges and frigates to be sent out with the vanguard of the Great Crusade. Manufactorums groaned and belched out great clouds of smoke as they desperately attempted to meet the immense production quotas of the Emperor's armies. Perhaps the most significant change, however, was the ascension of Kelbor Hal to the position of Fabricator General. He had overseen much of the intensive industrial development across the Red Planet and was surely instrumental in aiding the Emperor as he embarked out on the Great Crusade, but despite this he was still uneasy at their alliance. The constant threat of execution if any were caught with outlawed technology loomed heavy over their heads, and it was an open secret that many of these forbidden artifacts still remained hidden upon Mars. The Emperor had ordered Kelbohal to collect anything which he had prohibited, and to seal it away in a fortified structure known as the Vault of Moravec. Having this Pandora's box of technocratic secrets hidden just below their noses was utterly tantalizing to the wayward technocrats.
I bet.
And yet, they were forced to simply let it lie, although nothing stays hidden forever.
I was gonna say, I bet someone's broken in there and taken a couple peeks at some stuff. I know it would be hard for me not to if I was a higher up in the Adeptus Mechanicus. I mean, just me personally, with my own curiosity and wanting to learn about things like that, I know I couldn't hold back. I would have to look at it, and who knows what I would unleash, you know.
Mars itself had become rather unstable over the long years of aiding the Imperium. Various factions were appearing, with high-ranking tech priests claiming that the Martians were going against the true will of the machine god, and that they had lost their purpose by focusing on another man's war rather than seeking out new discoveries.
I could see that being a viewpoint they would have.
For rival manufacturers.
Because, like, the whole point of the Martian viewpoint and their religion, I guess even, would be to discover new technologies, learn them, learn how to integrate them, and to keep advancing. And instead, that's, you know, the Emperor coming by has kind of shifted their focus to just creating machines of war for them. And yeah, they are just fighting someone else's fight. So yeah, interesting.
Led by tech priests of differing ideologies to sabotage or disrupt the other's operations. It was even rumored that some of the great Titan legions had also become swept up in this disagreement, and that the priests were desperate to leverage their support of the god engines to their own cause.
The god engines.
This could have all ended at the level of theological and ideological debate. However, in the following years, Horus took his stance upon the galactic scene, and Mars was forever changed. With the onset of the 31st millennium came perhaps the most significant era of humanity's strange and destined tale, and this period would be defined by the civil war known as the Horus Heresy. As the corrupted Warmaster began to plot his rebellion, he foresaw that a siege of terror would be a most challenging and potentially fatal plan, but that it would be made ever more doable if he had the support of Mars. In order to sway the Martian cult to his cause, Horus sent an envoy to the Red Planet, headed by a tech priest known as Regulus.
I mean, it's smart, you know? Mars is obviously the closest, other than the moon, but Mars is the, you know, is Venus closer? I don't think so. I think Mars is closer than Venus is. Anyway, but Venus I don't think would probably be viable just because of how close it is to the sun. But anyway, Mars is like, you know, the closest orbiting body to us other than the moon. So having a forward staging base, but not only that, being able to take away the, you know, arms and production that the Mechanicus provide Earth, taking that away and also using it as a staging ground to, you know, attack from. If he could convince the Adeptus Mechanicus to turn, that would be huge. That would be a huge thing for Horus.
To the Red Planet, headed by a tech priest known as Regulus. It was this man who first explained to him the ideological divide between those on Mars who supported the Emperor as the Omnissiah, and of those who simply saw him as a false prophet, and so there were none more suited to exploit this difference than of himself. Upon first landing on Mars, Regulus met with Kelbor Hal to explain his proposition and to outline the plans for the Mechanicus should they agree to back the Warmaster's operation. Despite the ambassador also being a tech priest, the Fabricator General could not help but notice the similarities between this visit and of the arrival centuries back with the Emperor. Both were outsiders who sought out something for themselves, with only meager promises being provided to the Martians should they accept. Regulus, like the Emperor, requested the sole use of the Forge Worlds at his disposal, but that they would only supply the armies of Horus rather than those of the Imperium. In return, he promised that the Fabricator General would be permitted to eliminate any rival factions upon Mars, and that he could solidify his control of the Red Planet by any means necessary.
Little Darktide artwork here with the power up, you know, the heal station. Okay, all right.
Whilst a tempting offer, this was not particularly interesting to the technocrat. The Forge Worlds of the galaxy were already prioritizing the needs of the War Master by supplying his forces throughout the Great Crusade, and so this agreement seemed to be one which would simply shift the crown of dominance from one Terran autocrat
to another. Yeah.
He had no guarantee that Horus would provide anything beneficial to the Mechanicus, and that this entire ploy seemed to be a foolish endeavor, meant only to embolden and strengthen a new overlord. Sensing his uneasiness at the possibility that Horus would simply hold a parallel to the Emperor's rule over Mars, Regulus attempted to sweeten the deal by promising to pass over several STC databases from the recently conquered Auretian technocracy, who had been pummeled into submission by the Lunar Wolves Legion.
I was going to say, you would have to sweeten the deal to get them to turn over. You would have to, like, loosen up regulations on AI, and you would have to give them something else of great value in order to get them to turn, because you're asking them essentially to back a smaller force that is unproven to them to be able to give them anything else beneficial. So you would have to have something to really tempt them to turn over. Otherwise, like, why would they?
Who had been pummeled into submission by the Lunar Wolves Legion. This was a rather tempting offer. To the Mechanicus, there is nothing more sacred or enticing as a standard template construct. These ancient artifacts from the dark age of technology include the complete instructions on how to produce a specific piece of equipment from the natural resources of a world, including methods of mining, refining, forging, and maintenance. Even though this was a pleasant surprise to the Fabricator General, it was still not enough to sway his support to the traitor forces. Folding to his demands for more, Regulus informed him that Horus had promised to lift any prohibited fields of study from the Martians, promising them that they could research and delve into the forbidden fields of AI and genomic interference. As the final cherry on top of their agreement, he promised that they could finally open the antediluvian vaults of Moravec and plunder the sacred artifacts hidden away within its dark recesses.
Yeah, you would think that if there's stuff that the Emperor didn't want them to get into, he would have them put it in a vault, not on Mars, somewhere else that the Emperor would be able to control. So I don't know, maybe he did that for a reason, as a part of a way to, like, I don't know, tempt them, as a way of showing their loyalty by not giving into that temptation. Kind of a situation. I don't know, but you would think you would want more control over something like that, but who knows? Anyway,
under the sacred artifacts hidden away within its dark recesses. If you remember of their contents, then you will know that these shielded chambers contained the remnants of archaic AIs, warp-tainted technologies, and tools which could empower the Martians to a level of unmatched technological prowess. Upon hearing of this possibility, Kelborhal leapt at the opportunity of cracking the Forbidden Vault open, and he agreed to side with the arch-traitor to plunge the galaxy into flames. This can be seen as the breaking point of the delicate Treaty of Mars, and it was here that we can truly say that the Dark Mechanicus was born.
I was gonna say that must be how the Chaos Mechanicus came to be, when that's the schism.
As Regulus departed to inform Horus of the successful parley, the Fabricator General rushed to the secret entrance of the vaults, desperate to delve into their illicit treasures. He found the ancient remnants of tools from the dark age of technology, some of which
was that the Tacitus or whatever it's called from the MCU?
were still potent enough to crush an entire star down.
The Tesseract, not the Tacitus. I don't know why I was thinking. I don't know where that word even came from. Tesseract. It's the Tesseract. There.
Down to its core. Some of which were still potent enough to crush an entire star down to its core. Still, sentient artificial intelligences moaned and screeched at him through chants of archaic binary, claiming that they would annihilate his every enemy if they only gave them a body with which to kill with. Meanwhile, in the darkest corners held under arcane chains, were the databases which contained scraps of chaos-tainted code.
Yeah.
These were shredded remains of programs which had been fragmented into thousands of pieces, since they could bring the foul touch of the warp to whatever.
This is the World of Warcraft server room. This is where Blizzard keeps all the World of Warcraft servers. Yeah, that's what we're looking at right now.
Thousands of pieces, since they could bring the foul touch of the warp to whatever piece of machinery they connected to. This may sound rather terrible to us, but to Kelborhal, he was eager to learn of the secrets behind this technology. And so he restored the ruined fragments to their ruinous state of glory and permitted them to spread across the Red Planet as a terrible virus. It only took days for the taint of chaos to worm its way into every subsystem, every cogitator, and every piece of technology across the planet. And though it did not make itself known, it was ready to unleash the powers of chaos as soon as the Fabricator General ordered the attack. Not wishing to immediately initiate a civil war, he worked with his closest advisors to bring ruin to the opposing factions of Mars. this time through direct assassination attempts and sometimes open attacks onto the rival foundries themselves. This conflict would later be known as the Death of Innocence, and it led to the deaths of millions, with entire arrays of industrial facilities being irreparably destroyed by the period of strife. These small scuffles were rather insignificant in taking complete control of the Red Planet, however. But luckily enough, the Fabricator General was soon presented with an excellent opportunity to purge the world of his enemies. The tech priestess known as Coriel Zeth had arisen to rule over the Great Forge of Magma City. However, it was due to her personal beliefs which eventually acted as the provocation for the Dark Mechanicus to plunge Mars into an open civil war. She did not
that bitch.
To plunge Mars into an open civil war. She did not worship the machine god, nor did she recognize the Omnissiah. In fact, she did not follow the Martian trilogy at all,
Typical.
instead believing that discovery was its own innate reward.
Independent, strong woman. She don't need no Messiah. Typical.
Instead believing that discovery was its own innate reward and not a gift of the divine. This opinion was a rather dangerous one to hold on Mars, and it prompted the forces of Kelbor Hal to decry her as a heretic who must be expunged from their world at once. With this, the forces of the Dark Mechanicus unleashed their arsenal upon Mars. They sought to utterly scour the world of the presence of any and all who opposed their wishes and the wishes of Horus. Entire legions of Skitari forces were vaporized by the weight of nuclear ordnance levied across the Red Sands.
These look like purge troopers from Star Wars here now.
The rival god engines of the Legio Titanica fired salvo after salvo of their sacred armaments into the forge complexes, reducing the once mighty manufactorums to fields of molten slag. The levels of devastation were so severe that in the opening hour of this war, the forces of Legio Honorum lost 19 of their mighty and revered titans to the insidious attacks of the traitors.
That's a huge loss, man. Those titans can't really be replaced very easily. 19 lost. Damn.
And revered titans to the insidious attacks of the traitors. This pales in comparison to the weight of death brought upon the forge city of Ismesnius Lacus. The Dark Mechanicus agents fired their stock of virus bombs into the city, snuffing out 14 million souls in a single instant.
Jesus.
Furthermore, the chaotic scrap code previously seeded across Mars had been permitted to compile itself within the sacred subnets and core servers, leading to a large-scale demonic incursion across the world. Many of these immaterial forces manifested themselves within the legions of servitors and Skitari, resulting in horrific waves of mutated cyborgs, tearing their way out of the birthing factories into the enemy battle lines.
That would probably be a terrible sight to see. These mutated, chaos-imbued cyborg mindless drones just coming at you in droves. Good Lord.
Tearing their way out of the birthing factories into the enemy battle lines. Whilst Mars was quickly falling to the waves of death which swept the planet, hope soon arrived in the form of First Captain Sigismund of the Imperial Fists Legion. He had been dispatched to put down this foul rebellion, but even with his tactical prowess, it seemed to be a doomed mission. He succeeded in recapturing the forge complex of Mondus Oculum. However, the sheer volume of traitor forces before him prompted the captain to order a full retreat from the world, ultimately resigning it to its fate at the hands of the Dark Mechanicus. In the following days, the remaining loyalists who could not withdraw were hunted down and exterminated. Hundreds.
Damn, it doesn't sound like it's a good time for the loyalists, Mechanicus, man. It sounds like they got wiped out. It's surprising that there's even, you know, any Mechanicus left, but obviously somehow they turned this around.
Withdraw were hunted down and exterminated. Hundreds of Titans, primarily from Legio Tempestus, were brought low, with their crews detonating the internal plasma reactors so that the heretics could not plunder their sacred frames. Entire night houses were eliminated, with their legacy being cemented as defiant loyalists who fought to the bitter end against the raving lunatics of the Dark Mechanicus. Though the Red Planet may have fallen to the rule of chaos, they were somewhat stuck in their position. The rebellion had been launched rather prematurely, and so it would still be weeks or even months
before Horus could get there.
Horus reached the Sol system to aid them in
So
their cause.
They were isolated.
The armies of the Imperium, meanwhile, had blockaded Mars with hundreds of battleships, essentially isolating the fallen world from the rest of the galactic conflict. Nevertheless, as a final act to support the traitorous forces of Horus, Kelbor Hal had orchestrated the rapid construction of a truly immense battleship known as the Furious Abyss. This had been built in secret within the great shipyards of Thula, orbiting around the gaseous giant of Jupiter. Every single servitor, tech priest, and laborer had been burnt to cinder upon the completion of this Leviathan, all to keep its construction as a secret to the entire galaxy. This ship would later be bequeathed unto the Word-Bearers Legion as a gift, and though I will not tell of the story today, it would go on to be instrumental in the devastating Battle of Kalth.
Goddamn Word-Bearers.
Resulted in such a terrible decimation of the Ultramarine.
Bro, that is a picture right there. This man punching this dude's head off. Jesus.
This conflict resulted in such a terrible decimation of the Ultramarines Legion that they were unable to respond to Terra's desperate calls for aid during its fateful and climactic siege. It was not only Mars which had fallen to the sway of the traitorous forces. Dozens of Forge worlds across the Imperium had also followed in the way of Kelbor Hal and had pledged their industrial zones to Horus, hoping that he would fulfill on his promises to allow them to continue in their research into forbidden technologies.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, I don't know how long-range communication stuff works in the 40k universe. I don't know if it has to go through the warp or have some, I think it's just done through astropaths, right? Like astropaths can communicate to each other through the warp. But as far as like technological communication, like sending a signal from one planet through another through technological means, because what I'm thinking of is like it would be surprising that, you know, this chaos virus, I guess, that came to be didn't spread to other parts of other Forge worlds, you know, through some kind of signal transmission. But I don't know, again, how that works in the 40k universe, if there's any kind of faster than light, you know, transmission that can be sent out that could carry a virus or something that would be like a carrier wave for some kind of computer virus that could spread and corrupt other Forge worlds, et cetera, and propagate throughout the Imperium out there.
In their research into forbidden technologies. As such, the arch-traitor had amassed a vast army of Titan legions, traitorous night houses, Skitarii forces, and all manner of esoteric technological armaments with which to equip his armies with.
And it's not sounding good for the loyalists on Mars right now. This sounds like a bad time for them.
Nevertheless, the forces of the Dark Mechanicus, combined with the traitor legions, were ultimately unsuccessful in their attempts at overthrowing the Emperor. Aboard the flagship known as the Vengeful Spirit, Horus was finally slain in his fateful duel with his father, and although he mortally wounded the Emperor, it still marked the end of the bloody civil war. The surviving traitor legions, along with their primarchs, were driven back from Holy Terror by the combined might of the loyalist forces and were forced to retreat into the cataclysmic maelstrom known as the Eye of Terror. This gaping rift into the warp would serve as their blasted home for the next 10,000 years, with their later incursions being naught but a blight upon our galaxy as they attempted to finish the job which Horus had started in the bygone past. Along with these treacherous and malign Astartes, did most of the Dark Mechanicus follow.
I'm surprised that the Imperium wouldn't then take advantage of that situation, with it seemingly like a lot of the loyalists of the Mechanicus being, for the most part, wiped out and severely weakened. It surprises me that the Imperium wouldn't then take advantage of them to enact more stricter laws and policies upon them. Maybe they did, and I just don't know. But I would think they would want to put the Adeptus Mechanicus more under their influence after this, to make sure something like that obviously didn't happen again. And that obviously a lot of these technologies that were locked away can have severe repercussions because they've been, corrupted by chaos or, whatever the case may be.
Malign Astartes did most of the Dark Mechanicus follow. Witnessing the ultimate demise of Horus was the final straw for the heretical technocrats. They knew that they alone could not defend themselves from the Imperial Armada. And so any who had chosen to follow along the dark path of chaos decided to flee the great Forge worlds and to pursue their tainted research within the depths of the warp itself. Though none can be sure of the final fate of Kelbor Hal, it is said that in his vestigial days as Fabricator General, that he had become infatuated with the theory that the being known as the Dark King was in fact the true form of the Omnissiah, and that his...
I've never heard of the Dark King before. Wonder what that's all about. Something else to dive deep into. The Dark King, huh? And he thought that the Dark King was actually the true form of the Omnissiah. I wonder, I wouldn't think that'd be a reference to Horus, right? Because obviously the Horus, eventually got destroyed. So, I don't know. Anyway, interesting.
King waited with the theory that the being known as the Dark King was in fact the true form of the Omnissiah, and that his manifestation would herald a new dawn for all who followed the teachings of the cult Mechanicus. I will quickly explain that this being was a prophesied deity who would take the place as the fifth Chaos God, and who would have the strength needed to ultimately defeat the four patrons to bring peace to the galaxy by wrangling control of the tumultuous tides of the warp.
Now, that's interesting, because that's kind of the theory of what's happening to the Emperor right now, right? As he's on the way to becoming the fifth Chaos God with everything that's going on in present 40k universe. So that's interesting. That's pretty interesting.
Rather ironically, in the waning days of the Siege of Terra, it was indeed the Emperor himself who nearly ascended to claim the crown of the Dark King. And upon learning of this, legends say that Kelbor Hal was racked with agony as he screamed to the heavens in defiance of the true grace which he had so readily rejected. As I stated, we are not certain as to whether or not the traitorous tech priest perished upon Mars in its final battle, or if he too fled to the depths of the Immaterium, but his presence has not been felt since the end of the Horus Heresy. One of the final decrees from the Emperor before he was interned upon the Golden Throne was that any remaining traitorous forces should be routed out, killed, and that any record of their existence should be expunged from official databanks. Due to this, the archives of Mars have scant records regarding its eventual recapture by the Loyalist forces. The extent of our knowledge is that once Terra was reclaimed from the heretics, that the Imperial armies did indeed invade and reclaim Mars for the Loyalist followers of the cult Mechanicus.
It makes sense.
Perhaps at a future date, some learned scholars, or even an assassin of the Vanus Temple, may decipher a lost fragment which will reveal more information to us. But for now, we are left only to speculate as to the events which transpired in the reconquest of Mars. We can only hypothesize as to the scale of retributive fury which would have been leveled upon the Red Planet for its most heinous of crimes. The forged cities would have been reduced to rubble in order to root out any remaining vestiges of heretical worship.
Yeah, I bet Mars probably got like wiped clean, and then they had to like rebuild from like a literal scratch. I would not be surprised if they not the order to like purge all life. I can't think of what the inquisitorial order is for that now. Exterminatus. There it is. Not exterminatus, but close to that.
To rubble in order to root out any remaining vestiges of heretical worship. And it is possible that the vast databanks and routers would have needed to be purged entirely.
I bet.
Just to remove any final traces of warp-tainted scrap code. In any event, since the end of the heresy, Mars has remained as a loyal servant to the Imperium, and the Mechanicus has kept its word in adhering to the terms of the ancient treaty, all to best serve the needs of humanity. The Dark Mechanicus still remains, but thankfully, they have been largely confined to the hellscape of the warp, where they are forced to fight for their very survival against the untold hordes of demons, who would readily pluck their fickle souls out of their hollow cybernetic frames. They still toil away in tainted foundries and corrupted forges, all to construct new demon engines and weapons of terrible destruction with which to fuel the traitorous forces who they have aligned themselves with.
It's interesting. I would think, I wonder, again, this is just more speculation from my brain here, but like, I wonder if some of those warp tainted, information were like warp corrupted STCs. And so, what kind of knowledge from, the dark age of technology would some of these, Dark Mechanicus have, and what would they be able to do with that? That's just kind of an interesting thought,
with which to fuel the traitorous forces who they have aligned themselves with. But
because like you think about it, if they could actually really get a hold of and replicate a lot of the technology that happened during the dark age of technology when humanity was at its peak, that could be pretty fucking devastating, man. If that technology got into the hands of, Abaddon and some of the other Chaos Marines when they wanted to go out and start, the Black Crusade again. So that would be interesting. That'd be interesting if that ever happened.
Fuel the traitorous forces who they have aligned themselves with. But we must remember, there is to be no salvation for the heretic, and upon the day of retribution, they will be shown no mercy.
All right. Well, there we go. Another good video by the Scholar's Lore, the Schism of Mars, Warhammer 40k lore. So yeah, very good video. Honestly, I did not know at all that really Mars fell so hard to the corruption of chaos and to, turned essentially traitor almost as like a whole. I really wonder, it really sounded like, from this video that all the loyalists pretty much got destroyed on Mars at one point in time, and the entire planet turned to chaos. And then after everything got cleared up with the Horus Heresy, Mars just had to be purged. And so I would assume loyalists of the Adeptus Mechanicus from other Forge worlds had to come in and reestablish and repopulate Mars. Interesting. I didn't know that it had gone like that far, and that that great schism, and that's how the dark age, or not the dark age, the dark Mechanicus, Chaos Mechanicus started. But it's obviously, it makes sense, the temptation of wanting to get into these forbidden technologies and AI and things that have been corrupted from the touch of chaos, which kind of, I don't know if it necessarily really confirms, but it definitely leans more to like proving the theory that, you know, potentially a lot of these AIs during the dark age of technology that, you know, rebelled or whatever you wanted to say, that they might have actually just been corrupted by chaos, and that, you know, it was chaos's influence that started the whole AI uprising at that point in time to begin with, and you know, caused humanity's regression, which you know, then laid I believe that then led into the Age of Strife. I think the AI uprising happened before the warp storms happened that cut everyone off, but I could be misremembering. But great video by the Scholar's Lore. As always, there will be a link down below in the description of this video to the original video here without my commentary, so if you want to watch it without my pausing and commentary and interruptions and all that kind of stuff, you can feel free to do that. And obviously there will be a link to the Scholar's Lore channel, so you can go there and check out any of his stuff. You know, give him a like, give him a sub, you know, show the man some support. He makes some great 40k content. And if you would like to, I'm doing this reaction live for a lot of my YouTube members, so once I get done here, we're gonna have a little post discussion. So if you wanted to join in any of those discussions, click the join button down below. Check out the YouTube membership tier, see if any of them have any kind of interest for you. But with all those shameless plugs aside, appreciate you guys hanging out, watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, consider leaving a like and a sub, as it would help me and it helps the channel grow. And I hope whenever you're watching this that you're having yourself a great day. Peace out. See y'all next time.